The quiet hum of the jet engines was a lullaby I'd never expected to hear, certainly not like this. Outside, the world blurred into streaks of twilight, a watercolor wash of blues and purples against the deepening sky. But inside, the leather of the seat was cool beneath my fingertips, the champagne in the flute was perfectly chilled, and the silence was deafening, heavy with everything unsaid, with the vast, yawning chasm that had suddenly opened between us. Hours ago, I was staring at a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter, a note that felt more like a ghost of a message than a farewell. Gone to the Amalfi Coast for 2 weeks. Don't wait up. Love, Mom and Dad. No explanation, no mention of me, no thought for the elaborate plans we'd made for the summer. Just, gone. I remember the weight of the note in my hand, the way the cheap paper felt like a slap, a dismissive gesture. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was the casual erasure, the utter lack of consideration. I'd spent months, truly months, meticulously planning a surprise birthday celebration for my father, a milestone that deserved a proper fanfare. I'd painstakingly coordinated with his closest friends, ensuring their availability. I'd booked a venue that would perfectly capture the celebratory spirit he deserved. I'd even dedicated weeks to researching a ridiculously expensive, vintage watch he'd always admired, a piece he'd only ever mentioned in passing, a wistful sigh. I'd finally managed to acquire the watch a week ago, its velvet box tucked away in my closet like a secret hope, a tangible symbol of my affection and anticipation. And then this. This note, this sudden, unexplained abandonment, this casual dismissal of my existence, my efforts, my feelings. My parents, the very pillars of my life, the constants I had always relied upon, had simply evaporated, leaving me adrift in the sudden, echoing domestic silence. For a while, I just stood there in the kitchen, the note still clutched in my hand. The house, usually bustling with their energy, their distinct rhythms and sounds, felt cavernous, too large, too quiet. Their scent, a familiar blend of my mother's signature perfume, a subtle floral with a hint of something exotic, and the comforting, earthy aroma of my father's pipe tobacco, seemed to mock me, clinging to the air like a phantom presence. I walked through their meticulously organized home, a home that suddenly felt foreign, a stage set where I was no longer a principal actor, or perhaps even an audience member. Every framed photograph on the mantelpiece, every shared memory etched into the polished surfaces of the furniture, felt like a relic of a past I was no longer truly a part of. I saw my father's deep laugh lines, the kind that spoke of genuine joy and a life well lived. I saw my mother's proud smile captured at my graduation, a moment frozen in time. And as I absorbed these images, a cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound, unsettling disconnect, a feeling of being utterly adrift. They had chosen a life, a vacation, a 2-week escape, without a second thought for the person who was supposed to be their anchor, their confidant, their son. The next few days were a blur of suppressed emotion, a tightrope walk between maintaining appearances and succumbing to the turmoil within. I went through the motions of daily life, the commute to work, the necessary errands, the polite phone calls with concerned relatives who had noticed the unusual silence, the absence of our usual family updates. Each interaction was a performance, a carefully constructed facade of everything's fine, a mask I wore to shield myself and, perhaps, others from the raw truth. But inside, the knot tightened, morphing into a silent, simmering resentment that ate away at me. The birthday surprise, once a source of joyous anticipation, now felt like a cruel joke, a monument to my misguided devotion. The vintage watch sat in its velvet box in my closet, a glittering testament to my naive affection, a painful reminder of my dashed hopes. I couldn't bring myself to cancel the venue, to call the friends and admit my parents had simply walked away, leaving me with the shattered pieces. So, I waited. I waited for a call, a text, anything that might signal a shift, a realization on their part, a flicker of remorse. There was nothing but an expanding silence. Then, the email arrived, a small, digital ripple in the stagnant pool of my days. It was from a firm I'd never heard of, a name that sounded vaguely European and impossibly exclusive, a name that conjured images of understated wealth and discreet dealings. Attached was a document, a boarding pass. Not for a commercial flight, but for a private charter, the kind that spoke of effortless luxury and considerable expense. The destination, a small, picturesque island in the Aegean Sea, an island whispered about in travel magazines for its seclusion and its exorbitant luxury, a place designed for escape and indulgence. The departure date? Tomorrow. The recipient? Me. Below the flight details, in a stark, impersonal font, was a single line: "Your parents have arranged for your transport and accommodations. They will join you in 1 week." 1 week. They were taking a separate, presumably equally luxurious, trip, and I was being flown in, like an afterthought, a mere addition to their grand itinerary, to join them after they'd had their fill of whatever clandestine activities they'd concocted. It wasn't a reconciliation, it wasn't an apology, it wasn't even a gesture of genuine inclusion. It was an arrangement. A dictated itinerary, a casual command delivered through a third party. And in that moment, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, something shifted irrevocably within me. The simmering resentment, the quiet hurt, solidified, not into a fiery rage, but into a quiet, cold resolve. They thought they could orchestrate my life, my presence, my very existence, with such casual indifference, such profound self-absorption. They thought they could treat me as an accessory, a piece to be moved around their grand, self-serving chessboard, a pawn to be deployed as needed, when needed. They had underestimated me, profoundly. They saw my compliance, my quiet nature, my dedication to family, as weakness, as an inherent willingness to bend to their will. They were mistaken. Utterly mistaken. The next morning, I stood at the private terminal, the crisp air carrying the scent of aviation fuel and something akin to freedom, a scent I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The jet was everything I'd imagined: sleek, silent, and undeniably opulent, a testament to a world far removed from the one I'd inhabited. The crew, professional and unobtrusive, welcomed me with polite smiles, their efficiency almost disarming. I walked up the portable stairs, the sunlight glinting off the polished metal of the aircraft, reflecting a future I was now determined to shape for myself. As I settled into the plush leather seat, a strange sense of calm washed over me, a stillness that settled deep in my bones. I didn't feel triumphant, or vindictive, or even particularly excited. I felt in control. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the pilot of my own destiny. I didn't drink the champagne, the effervescent bubbles now seeming frivolous, out of place. I didn't look out the window at the receding coastline, at the world I was leaving behind, or at the one I was heading towards. Instead, I pulled out my phone, its cool glass of familiar weight in my hand. I opened my contacts, scrolled past my parents' names, their absence now a palpable thing, and found a few others. Friends who had been as excited as I was about the birthday party, friends who knew about my father's watch, friends who had shared in my anticipation. I sent them each a simple message, a brief, factual account of my parents' recent departure, the cancelled surprise party, and their current, separate vacation. I didn't add commentary, no complaints, no emotional outpourings, just the unvarnished truth, presented with a quiet dignity. Then, I sent a message to a few colleagues, discreetly mentioning that I'd be taking an unexpected personal leave, and that my parents were currently abroad, enjoying a spontaneous trip. The flight itself was uneventful, a smooth, silent passage through the sky. The crew anticipated my needs before I voiced them, a level of service that was almost disarming in its attentiveness, yet I remained detached, a passenger in my own life, finally charting my own course, my own independent trajectory. I arrived at the island's small airport, a discreet, waiting transfer ready to whisk me away. The villa was breathtaking, a minimalist masterpiece perched on a cliff overlooking the endless, shimmering blue of the Aegean. It was clearly designed to be a luxurious retreat, a sanctuary of understated elegance, but as I walked through the empty, sun-drenched rooms, I felt no joy, no sense of arrival. It was just a place. A beautiful, empty stage. The next week was a study in manufactured solitude, a deliberate cultivation of my own company. I swam in the infinity pool, its water merging seamlessly with the horizon, a visual metaphor for my own expansive sense of possibility. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for months, words that offered solace and perspective. I explored the quiet, sun-drenched island, its ancient stones and winding pathways a balm to my unsettled spirit. I deliberately avoided social media, the digital world that so often amplified perceived slights and demanded performative happiness, a world I no longer felt compelled to engage with. My parents remained silent, their deliberate absence a constant, silent testament to their priorities, their choices. I didn't reach out. I didn't beg for explanation, didn't offer an olive branch. I simply existed, in EIR meticulously arranged, yet ultimately empty, bubble, a silent observer of my own unfolding narrative. Then, the day arrived. A curt text message pinged on my phone, arriving 3 p.m. Meet us in the main lounge. I put down my book, smoothed my clothes, a small gesture of preparation, and walked to the appointed meeting place. The lounge was the epitome of understated wealth, all cool marble and muted tones, a space designed for quiet contemplation or hushed conversations. As the door hissed open, my parents entered, tanned and smiling, their faces relaxed, radiating the effortless ease of those who had been indulged. My mother blinked when she saw me, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by her practiced composure. My father offered a perfunctory, almost dismissive, "You made it." The conversation that followed was strained, superficial, a thin veneer over the unspoken truths that hung heavy in the air. They spoke of their trip, of the beauty of the places they'd seen, of the people they'd met, their words flowing like a well-rehearsed script. They offered no apologies, no explanations for their abrupt departure, for the cancelled party, for the blatant disregard of my feelings, my efforts. They spoke as if their absence had been a minor inconvenience, a temporary logistical hiccup, something easily overcome. It was as if I, and my meticulously planned surprise, had simply ceased to exist in their minds. It was then that my father's phone rang, its chime a jarring interruption to the carefully constructed facade. He answered, his smile faltering as he listened, his eyes darting to me, a look of dawning comprehension, then apprehension, spreading across his face. He spoke briefly, his voice lower, tighter, a subtle shift that didn't escape my notice. When he hung up, he looked utterly bewildered, as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath him. "That was David," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual joviality. He asked if the party was still on for next weekend. He said he got your message about us being away." My mother's head snapped up, her carefully arranged composure cracking. "My message? What message?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a sudden, unwelcome curiosity. I met her gaze, my own expression calm, unreadable, a carefully cultivated mask of detached neutrality. "Just a brief update," I said, my voice soft, even, betraying none of the quiet satisfaction that bloomed within me. "Letting people know about your travel plans. So no one was waiting around unnecessarily, making plans that would be disrupted." The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of shared understanding, but the brittle, echoing silence of a carefully constructed illusion shattering into a million pieces. My father looked from me to my mother, his face a mask of confusion and dawning realization, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with an alarming speed. The subtle network of social connections, the quiet dissemination of truth, had done its work. They had treated my existence as an afterthought, a variable to be managed, a child to be appeased or ignored as suited their whims. But they had forgotten that their lives, their reputations, their carefully curated image of devoted parents, were also built on those same connections, those same social fabrics. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the luxurious villa shifted, the veneer of forced pleasantries becoming increasingly impossible to maintain. My mother, usually so adept at smoothing over any ripple, at deftly navigating any potential conflict, found herself increasingly on edge, her usual grace replaced by a brittle anxiety. My father was quieter, his usual boisterousness replaced by a thoughtful, almost somber, demeanor, his gaze often distant, lost in thought. They spoke less of their travels and more of misunderstandings and oversights, their words carefully chosen, avoiding any direct confrontation. The luxurious villa, meant to be a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, where the walls were closing in, not from external pressure, but from the weight of their own manufactured reality crumbling around them, their carefully constructed narrative exposed as hollow. The emotional justice wasn't delivered with a flourish, no grand pronouncements or dramatic accusations. It was in the subtle shifts, the quiet betrayals of their inner turmoil, the way my mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore, the way her laughter sounded forced, the way my father avoided my gaze when conversations about friends and family arose, his silence speaking volumes. It was in the quiet realization that their carefully curated image of devoted parents, of pillars of the community, had been exposed as hollow, a fragile facade built on assumptions of my unquestioning acceptance. It was in the understanding that while they had enjoyed their carefree escape, their self-indulgent adventure, I had been left to navigate the fallout, to quietly reclaim my own narrative, to rebuild my own sense of self-worth. They were no longer in control of the story, and the uncomfortable truth, once loosed, could not be reined in. They had chosen their vacation over their son, over the sanctity of shared life. Now, they were left to contend with the quiet, persistent echo of that choice, the silent consequence of their profound neglect. The hum of the private jet had faded into the vastness of the sky, but the silence it left behind was far more eloquent, a profound and enduring testament to the irreparable damage of their departure.